Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you and Happy New Year. Welcome to the webinar that is going to talk to you about what industry brings in terms of resources and knowledge beyond funding in public-private partnerships and how we can value that contribution. I'm joined today by some fantastic panelists. Vinciane Perard, who's the Scientific Advocacy and Insights Global Medical Affairs for Rare Diseases at Sanofi. Welcome, Vinciane. Luca Sangiorgi, who is the Director of the Rare Bone Disorders Department and Coordinator of the Rare Bone Disease Centre, ERN Bond Coordinator. And then Anton Usi, who is the Operations and Finance Director at ERNs. Together for Rare Diseases, those of you that are familiar will remember that we have been working over the last few years to try and build opportunities for collaborations in a public-private partnership fashion. And the initiative has spent a lot of time trying to work with both industry and European reference networks to really identify opportunities for collaboration and also to share what each of those partners can bring to this conversation. Our last webinar covered what the ERNs are and how they can contribute to these public-private partnerships. And this webinar is going to talk a little bit about the fact that, yes, industry can bring some funding, but actually they can bring a whole lot more to the conversation. They can bring other experience, skills and knowledge. And today's webinar is going to talk a little bit about what that added value industry can be bringing to the conversation. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Vinciane Perard, who is going to talk to you a little bit about where and how industry can contribute to these public-private partnerships. Thank you so much, Vinciane.
Well, thank you, Sheila. Very happy to be part of this webinar and actually to talk a bit about a project we did last year exactly on this question. So we did that with IRDIRC. IRDIRC is the International Rare Disease Research Consortium, and with the company constituent committee and in partnership with the Rare Disease Moonshot that you might have heard about, and the project was also funded by the EFPIA. We wanted to shed some lights on public-private partnership, and in particular to articulate what companies brings to the table beyond money, because that's always the obvious part, of course, that everybody had in mind. And we thought it would be interesting to have a bit of, to take a step back and have a survey or a study that would explore that. So we looked to, so we explored public-private partnership. I have to say there's no definition of a public-private partnership. So we looked specifically to collaborative models, to collaborative initiatives. So that means you don't hire somebody to solve your problem. You have a common problem that you put on the table and you bring all the stakeholders actually to have a discussion on to solve this. And then we wanted to see, you know, what kind of in-kind contribution industry brings, attributes to brings to the conversation. We did not look to, is there added value of public-private partnership? What are the limitations of public-private partnership? I think that has been explored elsewhere. And we also specifically focused on the industry. So I'm sure the same type of work can be done for all the other stakeholders, for academics, patient groups, and institutions. And there probably will be overlap, but we focus specifically onto the industry, and that's I think an important caveat. So we looked, one of the, would say, first conclusion, we looked to this public-private partnership as being an ecosystem. I don't like that word much because it's, I think, overused. We can say it's a community of brain. So every partner plays a role that brings their resources, their perspective. That's often very complementary, but central to that, to the success of such a partnership is actually a mutual understanding, and you need to grow through that. That's really something that's critical. You need to start to understand each other's perspective and create that mutual understanding to be able to go through the partnerships. So another important point, maybe to just set the scene, is this type of collaboration, public-private, can happen across the research spectrum or research continuum. So you can have them in a very early research in preclinical, but it can also be on real-world evidence or or patient-reported outcomes. So you will really find them across the spectrum. And what we also find is that you have a PPP in pre-competitive space and PPP in competitive space. And there are quite some difference, because if you're in the pre-competitive space, you will have multiple companies that are, it's very open, all the outcome will be open, it will be shared. And we are in a problem solving actually with a group of companies. When you're in a competitive space, most of the time it's more a one-one relationship. It is one company with one other partners, and then you create more proprietary assets or improvement of a process for a single partner. So both exist, both are important, but they're quite different. And of course, in a competitive space, companies cannot work together. And so we are very regulated, and so there's certain things that prevents us to work together in a very competitive space. But then regardless of the nature of the PPP, if we look then really to the key attributes, what is the benefit, I would say, to have industry specialists at the table? One thing that came across is the scientific and the regulatory expertise, and then the access to the infrastructures and the assets. So yeah, companies can contribute with their assets, with their infrastructure. They have also, you know, a scientific knowledge, and then the regulatory aspect, because having gone through the whole cycle, they often have a whole picture. I would say they have an end-to-end view, so that helps to anticipate that you might solve the problem here, but this is the downstream effect we will see. So that there's this back and forth across the development that is really something that is quite specific to the industry because of the way we operate. And I would say the second, beyond this regulatory and scientific expertise, the second aspect that came across quite loudly is more than the operation capability. I often say an industry, it's not a military organization, but it's very disciplined, it's very process-oriented. So that means things like governance are important for us, project management, risk mitigation, use of KPIs. So those are all things that are very common in the industry life and that you might see less in other type of organizations. So just industry will bring that mindset to the table. And another aspect is they're often global. They have a global footprint, so they have an international network, and then can also reach out to different international and regional partners, and that can have an importance in the scalability of the outcome of some of those projects. So what you create in one setting in Europe, then we can help sometimes to generalize that or to bring that to other parts of the world or to other therapeutic areas. So the industry being highly regulated, also we will see often bringing into the consortium, you know, notion of compliance, transparency. I might have already said that, but that's something that is quite regular. The third one is a bit maybe linked, but it's about the collaborative leadership and the innovation drive. And companies we work in cross-functional teams. So if you see what the development teams, there are many different expertise, many different people working on different issues that come together on a regular basis, and everybody has a voice. I mean, we here, everybody has a role, have a voice. So that collaborative leadership is a big thing. We also have a very competitive mindset, but the collaborative leadership is something that is done on a day-to-day basis. That's a way of working, and that's also something we bring to the table, that bringing different voices into a program. And I already spoke about the KPIs and the delivery. I told you that we're very process-driven. That means we often bring to a project a sense of urgency, that needs to be done, and the speed is important for companies and processes are important for companies. So that will all translate or come also across in the project. And then the fourth element that has actually gained in importance and developed during the last year is a patient-centered approach and the strengthening of the research ecosystem. There's alignment between industry and regulators about the importance of patient engagement, to have the patient voice into different stages of medicine development. And companies have had to create process to do this, to bring patient voice into into the different stages of medicine development, and to conceptualize what that patient journey is and how you listen to patient voice and how you integrate that. And so that has led to the development of various initiatives. Companies have now, I think, quite a serious experience with that, and to move beyond the tokenistic involvement of patient engagement. I think we have come over the years to something that's quite authentic and balanced. And then in turn, the patient organization then contribute the unique expertise, and it's also an opportunity to grow for them and to enhance, I would say, the research ecosystem through that. So there were more nuances, more aspects, but those, Sheila, were really the four important points. I would say the scientific and regulatory expertise, the operation capabilities and capacities, the collaborative leadership and the innovation drive, and then this patient-centered approach that has really grown over the last year. Yeah, and so I'm probably getting to the end of my time, but I think that those are really, we have done this study, and I was very happy to read the results, but I have also been part of several of those public-private partnerships, and I think the added value of having multiple companies together, multiple stakeholders going through this, bringing all these competences to the table and learning to listen to each other is really something that's quite critical to advance, especially in rare diseases where the field is still very fragmented.
Thanks so much, Vinciane, and that was really, really helpful and really insightful, because I think what you've shown there is beyond funding, there are so many other skills, competencies, and knowledge that is really valuable in that public-private partnership piece, and in terms of the research that's undertaken, which leads really nicely into introducing Anton Usi. Anton, you're going to talk to us a little bit about the academic research and how there can often be a disconnect between what the academics develop in terms of research, and they're not taking account of some of these elements, and how actually that has a substantial impact on bringing research and translating it into the kind of real world, and particularly for the rare disease community, and what your thoughts are. So Anton, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk today. And I'm going to try my best not to repeat everything Vinciane just said, and I'll try and keep it fresh. But indeed, I think the main challenge that we've noted in operating EARTRIS since around 2010, EARTRIS was built to try and create that connection between academia and industry, and take the pain out of PPPs, public-private collaborations, because they can be very challenging. For a lot of reasons. One, the primary one being the inherent mission of academia is to do exploratory research, discover new things. So not to have an opinion on what you want, but say, I want to use this latest technology to dig deeper into the molecular pathogenesis of a specific disease, or understand the natural function of pathways. And in that exploratory nature, it's a very creative process in which you're using very creative research methods. But the moment you have then a finding, a hypothesis, that invention, that idea that you can understand the cause of a disease and then want to do something about it, you go from this biology-rich, very creative exploratory research setting, and then you need to move into the chemistry of trying to build something that's going to then hit that pathway, and the engineering aspects of manufacturing this and scaling it up and being able to do that to the quality standards you need to do at to be able to serve a population, the economics of it, and in all of this in a very highly regulated space, as Vinciane had said. So as academia, the remit is actually quite limited, but we don't have the luxury of limiting ourselves to that first publication. And sadly, publishable data does not mean it's exploitable data yet. And this is probably the biggest connect, is that we have a gap in the data sets being generated by academia, rightfully so, sufficient to get publications, sufficient for the academic rigor, is not sufficient necessarily for being able to invest in the further development phases of that. So being able to understand what are the next people in this journey of knowledge, the next people who would take this knowledge on and try and develop it further, what are they going to ask of my data set? And having access to that expertise and then the understanding of the kinds of rigor that's going to be asked in the next phases, what hurdles are you going to have to jump over in those next phases is very important. And it's not easy to find that kind of expertise. So being able to collaborate with industry on that gives you a clearer view from where you are standing to right all the way through to the patient. And that's a very long distance. That can be many tens of years. And that's certainly to create a new medicine from a new target, you're talking of hundreds of millions to billions of euros, because there's very high failure rates in the process, because the biology is still eminently a black box, and we really are guessing a lot of the time. So there's a very, very high failure rate. So as academia, our job is to work siloed, know more than anybody else in the whole world about this very, very specific pathway, but in the context of the broader disease, of the broader the setting, and then in the context of being able to then create chemistry that works and is not dangerous and is able to be then turned into a product that has to be developed, is very, very multidisciplinary. So you very, very, very quickly have to deal with people and questions you had no idea even existed. So one of the biggest things that we find when we deal with academic researchers is they know so much about a disease or a pathway and have a brilliant technology, but then they don't know what they don't know. So they don't know what questions to ask or who to ask it to. And so a big challenge there is really being able to say, okay, I want to go this way, but by God, I've got no idea which way that way actually is and what is on that way and who's going to ask me what of it. So being able to work with industry or organizations that can support in understanding the industrial process, Iatris is an example, but there are many others, helps bring in that understanding of how to get to the patient, the line of sight to patient, and helps also to be able to then bring in the networks of that multidisciplinarity you need so that you can really start to engender those industrial relations. Because what you'll find as an academic as well is you already need kind of to show industrial rigor in your process to even attract the industrial collaboration in the first place. So having that mindset, that translational mindset, where the publication isn't the end, but it's the beginning, is also very important as well. That is something that attracts industry as well. We have a collaboration with a few of our global peers in the US, Canada, Japan, Australia. And one of the things we did early in about 2017 was ask ourselves, what are the causes of failure in our space, in the early translational space, preclinical? One of the biggest causes was PI failure to collaborate with the investigator because the chemistry between the organizations wasn't right. So it's so important being able to have the mindset of being translational, being patient-centric, and being open to collaborating. And as Vinciane was saying, it's about collaborative leadership. And sometimes because you're working in a very different context, as an academic, you need to publish. As a company, you need to make a profit. You need to work in quite confidential, quite competitive situations. It can be very hard to find alignment. So it's very important to think of what that long-term goal is that unifies all of you and work behind that. And then be able to work with people in a very open-minded way to say, that's our goal. How can we create a governance and operational structure that makes us get there together and with full trust? And so that also requires multidisciplinarity in your own organization, because you need to have the technology transfer, professionals who understand intellectual property to be able to understand who can share what, how will that work? You need to be able to understand how you want to handle data, who will own these data sets when you've created them, who can use them to generate further intellectual property insights, that kind of thing. And then, of course, your legals. One of the big challenges we have with the legal side of things is in the public sector, academic hospitals, the legal appetite for risk is precisely zero. And so it's very hard to try and do really exciting new things. And it's really hard to get legals in the room. So one very important element that I would always recommend is get the lawyers in the room with you from day one. Help them be part of the solution. Don't send them a contract on day 300. And help them be tasked with finding the solution of working together with another sector, with a public-private setting, so that you can really work together for that patient benefit. Make them champions for your project, not people whose job is only to kill the risk for their own organization. So I think industrial collaboration, it speaks for itself what industry can bring, but it also takes that mindset from the academic side, that patient-centric. So it may not be for everybody. Not everybody will want to collaborate with industry. But if you want to get your research to the patients, at some point it's going to go through an industrial process. And it may not even be industry that exploits it later, but there is a process that is best known by industry, the regulatory, the really rigorous, not exploratory, but confirmatory research process, which is very much about killing all the other variables so you can really attack the one variable you have. Nobody does it better than industry, because that's what they're paid to do. So I think long-term, you need to think about building relationships. It's about individuals. It's about mindset, finding your common goal, being very clear about what you expect, living up to the promises you make, and being ready to go from that exploratory creativity to very rigorous, very goal-oriented research planning. I think I'll leave it there. Otherwise, I'll just end up, I think, repeating what Vinciane has said.
Anton, that was really, really great and really helpful. I think it's really brought to light how important it is for academia, who have, as you say, all this fantastic knowledge that they then want to publish and they want to share. But if we go back to what we're here for, what are we doing for the patient? We need to be able to translate that and get it to the patient in the best, rigorous, safe way as possible. And that's where partnership with industry can really, really add value, because we can use their knowledge, we can use their skills, and we can use their understanding of that pathway to really build those structures. And let's lean on these skills. Let's exploit the skills, because if we don't do that, our rare disease community will continue to have challenges in getting new innovative therapies to them. So Luca, you have already taken this leap into a partnership with Sanofi, and I'm delighted to have you here to talk a little bit about what you've learned through that, and where you think industry colleagues have really helped in this pilot. And I believe you've got some slides to share. I believe the team are going to put the slides up. But Luca, welcome to this webinar. We're really looking forward to hearing your experience.
Well, thank you very much, Shira. And I think that the speech of Vinciane and Anton were the perfect introduction of what we went through, meaning that we really went through all these, the different passages that have been described by the two previous speakers. And I think that some of the recommendations that Anton was just mentioning recently are very important point. And going through the presentation that I will give you now, I will provide you hints on what has happened and when did this happen. Next slide, please. So the topic that we are working on in our pilot study is on real-world data, and to establish innovative clinical output for clinical trial. If you think about the topic, you immediately get the point of data privacy, and therefore this went through an enormous a certain amount of work with the privacy office of our institution in order to clear out all the aspects that are relevant. This is true for the public, for the call, the normal call. For public-private interaction, it's even more true, since the offices are not so, let's say, used to work in this kind of collaboration. And then specific training and specific, let's say, work on this point was really necessary. Then if you go to the innovative clinical output, TTO are getting more and more relevant for this point. If I can get the next slide, I can even more detail this aspect. Because if you want to work on the point that are highlighted in this slide, it's really an aspect of how can we share the data, the property of the data, the fact that we obviously can work on metadata, meaning we can work on the data, but we can provide answer to the question that are coming on a specific point that is osteogenesis imperfecta. We are now working also on another aspect that is achondroplasia. This has clearly an implication since ERN registries are really, let's say, a pivotal point on this, but we also need to be more and more trained and more used to work on this data in a joint effort with private institutions. Next slide will show you an aspect of how TTO offices should have a specific training, should have a clear mindset on working on this aspect, since the work and the output of the data can have a clear impact on this aspect. Next slide is showing you why it's relevant. This is a current this is a courtesy of Actigraphic that gave me this slide. And you can see that the application of digital endpoint is getting more and more crucial and more used in the different clinical trial. And therefore, another topic is coming out that is working with regulatory agency, and therefore having a specific training on also how to work on a regulatory agency is really needed. And therefore the support of institutions like EATRIS could be relevant also for this aspect. The next slide should be my last slide. This is the kind of take-home messages that we have got from the experience with the collaboration with Sanofi. The first point is the need of establishing and mutual understanding. This is really a relevant point, and I would say not only understanding but also trust. You need to establish, and as it was said before, it's a matter of person and personal trust. And in order to do that, it took us 2 face-to-face meetings, one in Bologna and the other one in Boston, that were crucial and pivotal in order to develop this mutual understanding and these mutual steps. From that on, it has started a great possibility of working together. And an example is the joint participation of ERN Bond and Sanofi as one of the pilot project of the Realize project. And therefore, we think that working in this Together for Rare Disease initiative was a great opportunity for developing public-private collaboration in a very crystal clear way. Thank you very much, and I'm here for any question if you need them.
Thanks so much, Luca, and it's great the way that you've summarized your learnings from that in terms of some of the things that Vinciane and Anton have also kind of covered about finding that mutual understanding, finding that trust, also being able to be having face-to-face and open meetings about what's achievable and what isn't. I'm really pleased to see that there's lots of questions that are coming through this. So it's great that you've sparked some interest. So our first question is for Vinciane and Anton. Vinciane, maybe I'll start with you. Could you give an example of what you feel has been a long-term common goal for public-private partnerships in your context? What would industry want to see achieve out of this?
Yeah, I think you need to look to a series of specific projects. So if I take the Connect for Children, for example, there the idea was we need to have a better infrastructure across Europe, a network to enable pediatric research and clinical development for pediatric research. So there has been a whole project to set up that network and to train capabilities, both in academia and from industry. So that has been really a collaboration with a specific goal to create that pediatric network. And you can look to the iChai and IMI project, and you will find many of those goals. There has been that one I've contributed quite some time ago was Adapt Smart, and we wanted to see, is there a way to look to the regulatory process and maybe have what there was at the time, it's not the breakthrough designation, but to go faster. But it's really a discussion with all stakeholders to say what is right, what is balanced. It's not only one stakeholder perspective. And then we have the very recent iChai Real ISD that is started, and there it's also about, in rare disease specifically, we feel we need more innovative clinical trial design, that they need to be adopted by stakeholders. So there too, we need to have some consensus. So that's what I mean with questions or common issues, and everybody has their own interest into this type of project. That's something else.
That's great. Thanks, Vinciane. Anton, from an academic perspective, what's been a kind of long-term common goal?
I think there's like two broad areas where it's quite where the result would be for long-term collaboration. One example would be, I think the easiest in rare diseases to think of is in registries, because that hits a lot of targets for each part of the domain. So for clinicians, that's about having access to a rich data set of understanding more about your patients through these registries. For industry, it's access to a group of patients and being able to understand the natural history of the disease and being able to develop clinical endpoints that can be used for clinical trials later. So trial readiness is a very important concept that both academia and the clinical world and industry needs to work together with, to be able to identify clinical endpoints that are measurable, preferably surrogate endpoints that might be acceptable to the regulator. So it's a very technical question, a very challenging one in rare diseases, but an important one in order to make the research process actually feasible. So areas around getting to trial readiness, understanding the disease, having identifiable patients, putting data into a regulatory grade registry, that hits a lot of check marks for both sides of the continuum. Developing new tools also is very important as well. So Vinciane, you mentioned Real ISD, for instance. Another example was we had a long-term collaboration with GSK with 7 of our sites, where they were looking for new imaging tools to be able to discriminate stronger candidates in their immune disease portfolio. So we were developing new PET probes, new PET molecular imaging probes for those diseases. And GSK was just interested in those as tools. So not looking to get any IP from the academic groups, but really just developing the science around the PET probes to be able to have good drug development tools. Whereas these could also have been theranostic tools, which would be great for the clinical process for the academics. So it's always around the science and around the clinical question and understanding more about it. And people can normally, in a well-structured collaboration, can take away the various outcomes that they need for their own needs.
Thanks so much, Anton. We have another question here that talks about, we talk about a variety in academic perspectives and outlooks, but how far is this also true for industry? Maybe, Vinciane, this is one for you. Is it fair to say some companies have more of a focus on working to improve the field widely, so for the greater good, than others? Are some more visionary? And do you think that all working in rare diseases makes companies more collaborative? Do you think working in that field, the collaboration is slightly more open?
Yeah, it's somehow a hard question. I would say in general, I think the rare disease field is more collaborative. So I think in general, you see that this habit of collaborating across stakeholders is very much at the origin almost from the rare disease community in the rare disease field. So I think for that, no doubt that it is the case. Now, differentiating companies, I cannot say some will be more visionary. It's probably the case, but I would say companies are very different too. So if you work, they have strong culture. So if you work at Sanofi, if you work at GSK or at Merck, you will have, you will come across different, a very different culture And then whether some companies work more for the common good than others, I think it's also quite, there's some topics that I think are pre-competitive, and then you will see companies collaborating, and then you're into, everybody's into it for the common good. But every company is also a for-profit and has a competitive area where you can't. And then you have individuals that are more collaborative than others. So I wouldn't necessarily judge in terms of company, but it is true that there is a strong difference in terms of culture between the different companies.
Thanks so much, Vinciane. Luca, maybe I might come to you, given your experience of the pilot. I'd really like to know first from you, and then Vinciane and Anton, please think on this question, because I'm going to come to you as well. But in terms of the pilot that you're currently running, what couldn't have been done if you hadn't collaborated with Sanofi? So is there anything in the project that, if you reflect on now, that you might have found more difficult to do had you been doing this by yourself?
Well, as I was mentioning, the critical point was readiness, meaning to be ready and to be, in a way, being able to answer to the question that were coming from both sides. And in a way, it took a certain amount of time to do this kind of, as I was mentioning, mutual understanding, meaning that without a clear understanding each other, and that's why I was mentioning the fact that face-to-face meetings were really crucial for that. It was really difficult to understand each other, meaning that we wanted to go for also other aspects that were possible to go to run into the pilot, but it was really with the kind of exchange and the discussion, it was clear that this was not feasible. On the other side, Sanofi wanted to go for some aspects that were not feasible and doable according not only to the legislation, but also according to the number that we had in order to work on. And therefore, I think that it's really a matter of a realistic approach that we need to develop jointly in order to achieve the result that we have. This is at the level of science. Then there is a level of administration, and letting the two administrations talk each other. That was not an easy task, meaning that it was critical. I mean, we thought that administration were speaking the same languages. Not true. They were speaking two different languages, and not only at the legal, for the legal aspect, but also for the administrative aspect. And therefore, it took a certain amount of time for them to get adjusted and to have a kind of a common language that will allow us to keep on going on the scientific activity. So there are, I would say, I mean, as Vinciane and Anton has really well explained before, there are different levels of collaboration that we at the academic level, we might not be so aware, but needs to be clarified from scratch. So having kind of a checklist of what should be done when you start this kind of collaboration from scratch, that now we have, in a way, would have been really helpful at the beginning. And I mean, thanks to the collaboration also with EATRIS, this was in another project, this was kind of more feasible. I mean, it's kind of learning by doing situation, but if you have this kind of information before, that would have speed up the process in a very consistent way.
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Anton, you've had experience of these kind of collaborations. What couldn't be done? And you've touched on it already in your intro, but what couldn't have been done had you not collaborated in some of those projects?
Yeah. I think, you know, even though we pride ourselves on having built an ecosystem that kind of reflect a little bit like the industrial process, most of our projects we could still not do without industry, because they have simply the power and the expertise and the knowledge and the networks to make things happen. So for instance, in a project that ended already a couple of years ago, an IMI project, developing platform trials, we put together, we created 4 clinical and research communities around 4 different diseases, one of which was a rare disease, neurofibromatosis, in order to advance the state of the art for platform trials, which is a very novel way of trial methodology, but has very complex elements to it, both operationally and statistically speaking, and therefore the regulatory process is complex. And because of working in the industrial context, we had this incredibly efficient process of engaging FDA and EMA at the same time, in parallel, being able to have very successful qualification discussions with them on the basis of the academic strength of the great clinical protocol from the academic community, the great statistical expertise from, for example, from Medical University of Vienna, who are world leading in this, but the industrial understanding of the engagement and the ability to speak the language of the regulator is second to none. And then when you're talking about technology development, again, engineering and being able to do the right things and do those things right to the rigor you need in order to not kill patients when you inject them with something. Nobody can do that like industry. So it's a risky path to think you can be a drug developer if you're an academic clinician or somebody else. I think it's very important to be aware of that.
Thanks so much, Anton. Vinciane, from an industry perspective, what do you see would be kind of challenging? Obviously, if we talk about academia, who are doing all this fantastic research and bringing early kind of knowledge to the conversation, if you weren't able to collaborate, where would industry be?
Oh yeah, I'm just one thing I wanted to mention that is hard sometimes in the collaboration is we work on different timelines. So, you know, there's sometimes for example, natural history of the disease is very important at the beginning, then it will change of time. So we are very dependent from the academic world and from the patient organization to actually gather that knowledge. And then we once you're there, you need to restructure and say, oh, that's the question we need to answer. And as you're developing, you learn by doing. But there's also, as I said in the beginning, the speed is quite important. So sometimes we are just not working on the same timelines and we need to go much faster, or there's something else coming in that we need to take care of. So it's not always an easy dance to dance, but understanding each other from that perspective, knowing, oh, that's what you can do. Okay, we keep that in mind. We might come back to you once we have solved or validated this, or so that's, I don't know if I'm totally answering your question, Sheila, but I think that understanding that dance and all the validation, everything that needs to happen to have a fully developed product at the end, to have a full clinical development plan, is we need each other, but we also need to understand where we stand and how to dance that. And I would think for me, sometimes the most critical part is the timelines. Everything takes a lot of time and we want to go fast. So it's a bit of a contradictory things there.
Thanks, Vinciane. Thank you so much. We are sort of coming to kind of the more or less the end, but in terms of my kind of reflections, I suppose, of today, I feel like the key things that come out for me is I loved your kind of summary, Vinciane, in these public-private partnerships are kind of a shared brains experience, you know, real opportunity to share those experiences, understanding, that mutual understanding, working in that pre-competitive and competitive space. It's not just about one or the other. And then the fact that industry can bring the knowledge about the governance and the risk and how we can kind of manage it from the end-to-end pathway. And Anton, you talked really helpfully about the idea of academics really having that fantastic knowledge, but then not being able to move it forward because they haven't thought about these preemptive questions. And if they are partnering with industry, the preemptive questions can be factored into the research that's being undertaken, and therefore the steps become more fluid and more easier to take, and that stepwise approach is done. And then the kind of working, Luca, you talked about with industry has really taught you that there are needs for mutual understanding, needs to understand what people are saying, whether it's a different language, and trying to kind of overcome some of these things. But co-developing those solutions has really helped move your pilot forward. And you've learned things that you maybe didn't know before. And I'm sure Sanofi colleagues in the partnership have learned things that they didn't know before. But if we do that, then from publication to deployment, innovations can actually move forward and be a reality for the rare disease community. And I think, Vinciane, you were talking about, you know, that your thoughts, and I could see Anton and Luca nodding in the background, that actually the rare disease community is much more open in general to collaboration. There seems to be a much bigger drive from the community to work together. And I really think that if we are able to move that forward, then these collaborations and public-private partnerships are really the way to go. So I wanted to thank you all this afternoon. You've been amazing. It's been a really interesting webinar. I really hope that those who have listened have taken away some interesting observations, and they will also be open to considering where public-private partnerships can really add value to the work that they're doing. Thank you so much, Vinciane, Anton, and Luca. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.